Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is quantifying wildlife. Of course, there are many open questions in sustainability that would require some quantitative thinking. What we have been doing, Gon and I, for the past 5 years is to think about whether we can find a way to have better quantitative estimates for wildlife. So, why wildlife? Does anyone have a hunch? Why are we thinking about wildlife?
It's much harder.
Because it's much harder? Okay, that's one reason not to do things for me, but okay. Anyone?
It tells us about biodiversity.
Okay, so we can care, if we care about biodiversity, let me just close that. Can someone close the door for a second for the noise? Thanks. So it tells us a story about biodiversity. To me, it's also like an important part of life on our planet, right? If we don't have anything wild on our planet, we're left with just ourselves. That's kind of a sad story, right? It sounds like a dystopia, just people roaming the planet. So it's an interesting open question. There are many other reasons, and we'll touch them throughout the lecture. Does anyone want to read it? Does anyone have a really nice accent and they want to read it aloud? No, not a very nice accent and they want to read it aloud as well?
I can do it.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Captain Nemo pointed out with his hand to the enormous heaps of oysters, and I could well understand that this mine was inexhaustible. For nature's creative power is far beyond man's instinct of destruction.
Awesome. I'm glad I asked with the accent. It was a good way to say it. So this is from Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas. Has anyone read it? Yeah, so many nods. You probably know that this is not like a true depiction of historical events, right? It's kind of a fantasy or a science fiction or whatever you would like to call it. But I think to some extent it does portray the state of mind that humanity has been walking around with for a very long time. So in our mind we can say, nature's fine. We're just a few people. Like what can we do to change things? Nature is inexhaustible. And when I myself stand in the middle of an ocean or like right in front of a cliff, it feels like, there's no way I can harm nature. People in this room obviously know that not to be true. But it's a state of mind that people have here on our planet, and maybe it's interesting to examine it, whether or not it's true. So, why should we care about numbers in sustainability? I already kind of discussed it. Does anyone have anything else to add? Like a very prominent example about sustainability that numbers have been very helpful for us.
Yeah. I think that's the one with the carbon settled, like when they found the hole in the ozone layer. It was due to something. They tried to track those numbers, and then we found that there is difference in global warming.
So I think there are two different things here. But when we think about climate change, right, the fact that we know that climate change is related to carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, it's because people measured carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere and they were able to see the connection between carbon dioxide concentrations and climate change. And we're now able to use all these things to have these models of predictions, how things are going to change with time. This is one, I guess, like the classic example, and I'm sure you've all seen this curve of like carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere and how it's going up with time. So it's something we all know very well. And then the next question, I guess my motivation is maybe what should we care about numbers in ecology and conservation? So, okay, climate change is important, it's a big deal, it's going to affect us as people. But again, to me, us caring just about the people on our planet would be kind of a sad planet. There's a reason that when, I read my nieces and nephews' stories, these stories are about a giraffe that went to meet a lion, that went to meet a rabbit, and they all hung out together and they did something. We are inspired by nature, we care about it very much, and I think it's a reason to start measuring and start having a better understanding of numbers. So what we have been doing in the lab for the past 5 years, or more, even before I joined the lab, is to try to get this sense of numbers that we use here in class, that one has been drawing on the board with, and you'll see for the next few sessions, to try and understand if we can say something about wildlife. And we decided to estimate the biomass of wildlife globally. Biomass, does anyone not know what biomass is? Okay, nobody's nodding seriously. So biomass is essentially weight of living things. So mass of living things, biomass, not that complicated. So if we study the mass of wildlife, that would be biomass. So I think the first question to me that comes to mind is, why do we use biomass as our metric? Has anyone seen Ron give this talk before? Okay, interesting. People are like, maybe I've seen it, and I surprised it. So why do I need to think about matrix at all? To me, my favorite example is that, like, let's say I go to the doctor's office and I say, I'm having stomach aches, I'm having back pain, my head hurts, tell me what to do. And the doctor is like a very, very good doctor, very rigorous. He asks me a bunch of questions and he'll say, Lior, you're not eating enough, you need to eat 2,000 calories per day. And I'll say, great, I'll go home and I'll start eating a lot of chocolate cake every day. Because my one metric would be calories. I only care about calories, I don't care about anything else. What a lovely world to live in. And of course, we all know what's going to happen next, right? I have to go back to the doctors and you say, you idiot, I thought you understood that you need to have like other things as well. So we need to consider many different metrics, and I think for many, many years, people have been focusing on this metric of species richness. Why? Because it's interesting, it's cool, it's relatively easy to quantify, depends on what extent of taxonomy you want to go into. We can see something, we can see the differences between things, right? Obviously, a lion and a rabbit are not the same animal. So it's cool, and we think about diversity a lot. It's also helped us a lot when we consider things like evolution, right, and speciation. And it's really interesting, but it tells just a fraction of the story, right? In the same way that calories tell a fraction of the story. Does anyone have in mind what would be the problem with something like species richness as a single metric to monitor biodiversity?
You can't tell amounts. You can't say how many.
A zoo, the zoo would be considered a very good place for biolife, but it isn't really.
That's a good point, right? If we have zoos everywhere, check, right? It's fine. We have everything. We have, let's say, kind of a Noah's Ark situation, two of everything, and we're good. Is that what you were going to say as well, or something different? Okay, so it just tells us a very specific part of the story. So another thing we can do is go and estimate the number of individuals. We can count, go species by species and count how many individuals there are of that species. We can say, it's now we have some sort of metric for abundance as well. It's really cool. But this would be also unfair in a way, because essentially I would be comparing things that are very, very different. So, for example, when I stuck with the lion and rabbit in my head for the last several minutes, so we can go with it. If a rabbit walks in the forest, does it leave anything behind it? Do we see that it walked in the forest? Not necessarily. If an elephant does, it has a very different impact on its surroundings. So these animals, they have a different way of interacting with their environment. It's mainly due to their mass. So they consume differently. What they leave behind them is very different, right? The things a mouse leaves behind it is very different from what an elephant leaves behind it. They break things around them in a different way. They compress the ground in a different way. So maybe it's not really fair to say, I have 100 million of this and 100 million of that. So it kind of implies an unfair comparison. So what we do is we solve this. We don't really solve this. Our choice of metric is mass, which enables us to compare species with very, very different body masses. And this biomass is, by the way, there's a chair over here. I can see you sitting there. Okay. There's also a chair there you can get it. So biomass really enables us to compare species with very different body masses. And it also correlates to things like energy consumption and other things that are to do with the animal's interaction with the environment. So it can tell us a bigger scientific story. So that's what we chose to use. Yes?
Aren't there also issues with using mass as a metric? Like the rabbit and the elephant, you're saying like, oh, let's calculate the biomass of all the mammals in the, out on the Amazon rainforest. Like, so you'll get a number, but that number can be 5 elephants to 100,000 rabbits. So it doesn't really give you something that's a bit more accurate than what you spoke about in combining other parameters together.
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is not to use mass as the total, but to use mass also to different groups. So I can say, instead of saying, incorporating together all of the mass, and this mass includes 1 elephant, thousands and thousands of small rodents, I can say I have 1 ton of elephant and 10 tons of rodents. So what I meant to say was, this would be helpful in creating a more fair comparison than saying, X elephant versus Y rodents in terms of numbers. Is that clear? Okay. This isn't to say that this is a perfect metric. It's an imperfect metric, like all other metrics. Essentially, it has a part of the story. And I'm not here to suggest in any way, if it sounded like it, I take it back. I'm not here to suggest in any way that we should scrap the matrix that we have been using before. But we see biomass as a complementary metric to things that have existed in the past. It's a different perspective, and if you enjoyed my lovely cake analogy, it goes back to that. So we can instead of using calories now, replace it together with protein consumption and only care about protein consumption, is very much in style these days. We need to have a holistic perspective. So biomass with other biodiversity metrics like species breaches, that would tell us the entire story.
If you know the total biomass of elephants and the total biomass of rabbits, you practically know the number of individuals because you know the average mass of an elephant, don't you?
Right. So it's true. It's more of a way to tell the story than a way to. So if you would like, you could convert the values to values of number of individuals as well.
The population itself relates to biomass better than number of individuals.
Exactly. So biomass correlates better to other things. And if you wanted to convert it back to number of individuals, you would have to use body mass again. So you can't say, let's take all of the biomass and divide it by the mass of an elephant, and this is the number of mammal individuals I have. You would have to take into account the mass of an individual. It's a great question.
You're just ingesting the animals or something?
So let's sorry. From now on, when you ask questions, maybe say your name and which lab you're from, so I can get to know you while you're asking questions. So are we interested in also microorganisms? Yes, people in the lab have done extensive work on microorganisms. Now we're going to talk about what you can call megafauna or wildlife. But if you're interested in microorganisms, I can tell you a lot about interesting things that people have done in the lab as well.
I thought the advantage.
What's your name and which lab you're from? I just remember.
Earth and Planetary Science.
Awesome.
So I thought the advantage of looking at mass comparing to look at number of individuals that you can talk without separating different species. You can talk about the impact of the entire thing because you don't want to say 50 million things, but instead of talking about mass, you can talk about impact.
So you can do that as well, definitely. So it depends on the resolution you want to have the discussion. You can compare within wildlife. You can compare,
But your work is separating species.
So let's talk about it when we dive a bit further. Okay, it's a great question. Let's talk about it when we dive a bit further.
No lab?
No lab.
No lab. If you had to say in one sentence, what is the basic reason to use mass? What's the motivation? What do you mean in it's more fair?
In one sentence, to summarize what I said before. So it correlates to energy consumption, which is like maybe the scientific reason. I think it tells the story better in terms of variance between individuals. So things like elephants and mice, if I reported their numbers, it would be misleading because it sounds like I'm essentially putting them on the same scale, which for ecological reasons and also reasons of wanting to be reasonable, we can't. Does that summarize?
So the reason is ecological.
So the reason is both ecological and maybe reasonable to some extent. You can also report number of individuals. I would claim it's just unfair, but yes, you can think about the ecological reasoning.
Okay.
Anyone else? Cool. Thank you for the questions. It's really nice. Okay, so just to make sure we're using the same language here, the units we're going to be using here are units of megatons, so 1 million ton. It's a very large number. It's very hard to put some perspective on large numbers, as we talked about in the previous lecture, and we will talk about in the next lecture as well. So just to put things into perspective, if you consider 1 megaton, you can imagine a very big cube that's 100 meters long, 100 meters wide, 100 meters tall. If you fill that cube with water, it would weigh roughly 1 megaton. Make sense? Okay. So just as an example, we talked about biomass, we talked about the units we're going to be using. Let's try to estimate the mass of people on our planet. Make sense? So what's the biomass of people on our planet? Now, the year 2025. So if I would take the mean human, I can say the mean human weighs about 50 kilograms.
Yeah.
Okay, who's bothered by that? Some people. If you're bothered by that, you're probably not considering the fact that a large portion of the population are non-adults. They're smaller, we call them kids. So if you take them into account as well, the mean mass is roughly 50 kilograms, maybe 55 if you want to be like very precise. And then to calculate the biomass of humanity, what would I need to do next?
Tell how many humans.
How many humans there are? So how many humans are there?
10 million?
8.
No, 7? 8.
8. So roughly 8 billion. And then if I multiply these two numbers, I come up with about 400 megatons. So 400 megatons, if you remember this massive cube from before, if I took all of humanity and I put it on one side of a huge set of scales, and then I pile on 400 of these cubes I mentioned before on the other side of the scales, they would roughly weigh the same. Okay. But then there's a problem. So this number of 8 billion, I don't know if you remember, but like a couple of years ago, it was everywhere. Humanity has crossed the 8 billion line. Wow, it's really amazing. And that's mainly because we're just like very good at monitoring humanity, right? We just go and collect the data, and there are people, central bureaus of statistics everywhere, and they combine everything together. And the UN comes up with projections. But I'm always disappointed that no one laughs at this joke. But then unfortunately, it doesn't work for other species. So we have to come up with another way if we want to estimate, let's say, the mass of mammals on our planet who are not humans and not related to humans, so wild mammals. So how can I do something like that?
You know how much carbon you have in the plants?
Okay, that's one way to do it. I can think about what is the carrying capacity of the planet, right? So how much am I able to feed them?
Yeah.
That's one way to go about it. Can you think about a problem with this idea? It's a great idea, by the way. Like but is there some problem?
Problems?
Sorry?
Problem that's related to statistic issues that...
To assumptions.
Yeah. Not sure.
Anyone other ideas?
Maybe about like
Your name and which lab you're from?
Alad, Segal lab.
Cool.
Maybe like a living area, and I need to assume that every big species there is less elephants and rabbits, and if I can I think it's true, but if I can assume that, I can assume that each species has roughly the same biomass, maybe to give some boundaries, and then I can suggest like how many how many live in square meter or something like that, and like we did with the forest, and then I need to multiply it by a number of different species, something like that.
Cool. Did everyone hear that? Did you hear that in the back? You're not responding, so I'll move on. Go on.
I think a question like that depends how specific you want to be. It's not that simple, and it depends about the animal and the medium the animal lives in. But you need some kind of field study as a beginning, or some kind of information from outside, and then you can use that with the knowledge of the area to try and see, like, I saw in this area this number of animals, now I can know how many rabbits are in a certain field, and from studying other fields I can try to infer how much are in other fields and then build up from there.
That's cool. So you're essentially suggesting the same idea. You're saying we can come up with, estimates for a specific location, and then we can extrapolate them globally, right? That's kind of what you're aiming for. You thought maybe more about like not going out in the field ever and assuming everything, but that's like maybe a step forward. It depends on how rigorous you want to be. You're the
I think that we just monitor other species as well, and we do it as okay as we can, and we have to correct for our selection effects and whatnot. But people monitor butterflies, people monitor bears, people go into the wild or to the forest.
Cool. So essentially everyone's correct to some extent, and that's really great, like back of the envelope thinking. And some, when we're now discussing things that are beyond the course and actual studies that we've published. So one thing that we have to have in mind is what level of accuracy do I want to have when I report these numbers. So one thing I can do is like do a back of the envelope sanity check, like we've been doing in class, which is great, and it's very helpful in these types of studies as well. And other things we can do is collect data that other people have gathered from the field and try to come up with some reasonable way of estimating the global biomass. So I'm not really going to go into it here because we're going to go into it a bit later, but essentially what we did was collected global population reports, so field studies from people who do very hard work and do monitor species, and then we use them to extrapolate these estimates to other species as well and come up with a global biomass estimate. We can talk for a really long time about the problems of using this method, but we'll talk about it in a few slides. But that's the reasoning behind it, using data that people have collected and extrapolating it to some extent to try and see what the global biomass is. And then let's skip the intricacies of the methods for the time being and do an open-ended question. We did our work. We came up with a result, and now I think a type of one thing that was on my mind when we came to do the study was which fraction of the current day mammal biomass on Earth is wild. So if I collected all mammals on Earth, which, don't forget, we're mammals, a lot of the animals we use for our food systems are also mammals, things like cow and sheep. And also we have mammals on land and in the marine environment, like whales. So if you collected all of them, which fraction would just be comprised of wild mammals? The question clear?
Do we count as wild?
No. Are we wild?
No.
Now in the AC with the classroom and I want to make it. Are we wild? No.
And the marine mammals, they are wild.
Sorry?
The marine mammals?
So the marine mammals are wild. Yes. So blue whales, stuff like that, elephants, stuff like that, are wild. Let's give you some sort of discount here and say things that are very, very human associated, like rats that really enjoy our surroundings, so rats and mice. We can consider them not wild, so they're in our group. They're within our team. Okay? So which fraction of the mammal biomass on the planet is wild? Is it 75%? A couple of brave souls, 50%. Another couple of brave souls, 25%. I guess, quarter of the cast, and 5%. Okay, maybe 10 people. So, kudos for being such optimists. I'm very sorry to crush your dreams. No, I'm kidding. But from our study in 2023, we found that only roughly 5% of the mammal biomass on our planet now is wild. Has anyone not seen this type of diagram before? Cool. So if you haven't seen this type of diagram before, it's called a Voronoi diagram. So it's kind of like a pie chart. The shape of each polygon doesn't matter, just the fraction it takes up from the whole. This just has two effective dimensions, so it allows us to see even the smaller fractions that usually in a pie chart would look like a line.
What's it called? I didn't get the name.
Voronoi diagram. Yeah, so we like using it in the lab, mainly because first of all, it's pretty, and second of all, it allows us to see really the very small fractions that in a pie chart you would not be able to see.
I just have a small technical question. Why is there, I've seen this before and I thought about this, why is each separate field not divided into this metric, like in the shape of the penta? So I could count it and then get even enough, you know what I mean?
So are you saying why are each of these not a perfect square?
Yeah, no, I mean how can I estimate from this how many of these penta or 10 metric goes within the orange field, let's say, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I cannot because it's like a triangle
So
shape.
you can, because there's this thing here for scale. This is also from the original publication, and also we have the numbers that we provide. This is the best visualization we found. I think our worldly data is just writing an article on this piece, and they redid it in their own way, which kind of enables us to do what you do. I think, no, like Matrix, no visualization is perfect. So there are many ways to look, to consider what's your favorite way to visualize things. We talked about whether we would see each group as a whole, or maybe think about subgroups. So you asked before, right? Do we think about subgroups as well? So yes, we do think about subgroups as well. So it's kind of hard to see here, but humans and cats are way roughly the same. But we also have all the other domesticated mammal groups. So things like sheep, buffalo, goats, things we use around the globe for our I don't want to say needs, for our food systems. And here you can see this tiny polygon here. These are elephants, and on the other side, these are baleen whales. So you can think about it in terms of great whales, things like blue whale, fin whale, stuff like that. So we can also look into a group level. Because of the caveats of our estimates, there are many issues to look at it at the species level. We do verify and do our best to report it at the group level. I'm happy to discuss it further with people who are very interested. Let's not dig too deeply into that.
The bears are in the wild for them?
Yes.
Can I ask you?
Please.
Do you have something similar about
Sorry, I didn't ask your name.
Sorry, Karen. Do you have something similar for plants?
So if anyone's interested in stuff like plants, there's a microorganism. There's a paper from 2018 by Inon Baron, who's now a PI here in the institute. He estimated the biomass distribution across all species on Earth. So these groups are included there. And there are also follow-up works from, not really follow-ups, but unrelated works from people in Tom Crowther's lab in ETH that also did similar interesting things with plants. Okay. So why are such estimates useful? If we could have an estimate for the total biomass of mammals, what can we do with it?
We could compare.
We can compare. That's one thing we discussed. Definitely, we can look at this thing here and say, well, okay, when I think about humanity and whether it has impacts on our planet, I should definitely not just consider myself standing in front of a forest or a cliff. yes, humanity comprises a large fraction of mammal biomass, and we can also compare things within domesticated mammals and within wild mammals.
And if you have estimation from the past, you can compare between the current. Like you mentioned the multi-body.
David Attenborough?
Yeah, so he did it with like
With species richness or diversity.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Changes in this diagram will explain.
What's your name? Where are you from? Sorry.
My name is Tali. I'm from Seattle, Greenspoon.
Cool.
And changes in this diagram will explain things about the dynamics between different species.
So exactly. So you both thought about the temporal dimension, right? So we can think about how things have been evolving over time. There's this thing called shifting baseline syndrome. Has anyone heard of it? So it's a really cool term that people have been using in ecology for the past, let's say, 10 plus years. That essentially means that we keep moving. We can't keep moving the goal if we don't use our actual knowledge. What does that mean? One day, a Weitzman student can come here at the year 2100, and he'll get taught in class. They'll get taught in class that there are 100 elephants on this planet. Okay, have there always been 100 elephants on this planet? Maybe it's fine. Maybe they're doing better than they did before. We need to have some sort of baseline that is established based on knowledge. Obviously, a baseline established based on knowledge, based on just biomass, is an imperfect one. It's just a specific perspective on the story. But it allows us to have a better understanding of where things were in the year 2020. And over time, we can either go back in time or move forward in time and see how things evolve. So for essentially monitor using data-driven or more informed methods. So not just use whatever we know from our surroundings. How many times people who are born in the 1930s and 40s in North America, they say, when I was driving as a kid through a road, on the windshield, I would have thousands of small bugs that are shattered on my windshield when I was driving, and now it doesn't happen anymore. Okay, that's an experience, and it's probably true, but it would be better if we were able to really say something quantitative about it. So this is one step from one perspective on our way towards having better baselines. Okay. So essentially, the question on my mind when we finished and published this paper was, okay, but how did we get here? So it was, I don't have the slide here, unfortunately, but I was scrolling through Twitter one day, and someone put up this thing here. And people on Twitter say, it was Twitter at the time, very confidently, they said, well, this is not a problem because humanity has expanded, livestock have expanded, but wild mammals have always been whatever they are, 60 megaton, so it's fine. And I was like, this guy on Twitter is super confident, but I don't even know the answer. And essentially, we dug through the literature and we realized we don't really have very good answers for this question. So how did we get here is not a very good scientific question. We had to distill it into something more realistic. And we decided to ask, what was the composition of mammal biomass like in 1850? So we now have the story of, kids who are born in 2025. We kind of know what world they're born into, but their great-great-great-grandmothers, what did their world look like? So it's not like the deep past. It's something that we can actually consider in terms of even some of our families. Do you have a question?
Not for now.
Okay.
Is it possible to turn on the air conditioning?
I think it's on. It was on, but it was just on 25 degrees. I lowered it now.
And
We'll have
turn
fun.
off the light.
Turn off the light?
Yeah, kind of dip down.
Yeah, I think everyone will fall asleep. Thank you for the confidence in me, but I don't think I can keep everyone up. let's see. We'll take a break pretty soon. Okay? Where should we take a break? Actually, you know what? Let's take a 10-minute break here, let the room cool down a bit, and then we'll come back for all of this. We were left with this open-ended question of what was the composition of mammal biomass like in 1850. And here I can tell you that there's like another level of complication, right? Because we said before that there is no Central Bureau of Statistics for every species. But of course, if we consider that we have a lot of uncertainty about the current day biomass or the current day population size for many species, if we have to go further back in time, people in the early 1900s, they weren't as interested at estimating, global numbers of wildlife as they were at hunting them and other things. So essentially, how do we tackle this question? For humans and livestock, we can tackle this question relatively easily by just compiling available data. We have to make some assumptions there, but we know ourselves so well that we're even able to estimate how much fatter has the mean human become over the past, few tens of years. Hint, we're fatter than we were before, not just because, we're bigger and we eat more, but also because the mean age in the population has changed. We're also older. So nice, we're fatter and older. It's a lot of fun. For wild land mammals, we performed a dedicated literature survey. I will say already now that our estimate for wild land mammals that we're able to provide is a very, very coarse preliminary estimate. I'm happy to discuss it with anyone if you're interested after. But here I wanted to talk about what we did for marine mammals, where we used the population dynamics model. So I'm just going to talk about it for maybe 5 minutes, unless you have tons of questions. And then I want to talk about how... No, I'm happy. I'm just not making promises. I'm happy if you have any questions. And then we're going to talk about maybe how back-of-the-envelope calculations fit into our actual work. So humans and marine mammals, they share a complicated history. As I said before, people in the early 1900s, they weren't as interested in going and counting how many blue whales there are. They were more interested in hunting them for various reasons, geopolitical, using their blubber, using spermaceti for the perfumes, many, many different things. We also have this iconic story of Moby Dick that came from this excavations of hunting whales. So it leaves us with a kind of an open question, right? If people didn't document their numbers before, we have to find a way to come up with an estimate. And as I said before, we did it with a population dynamics model. So why do I even mention industrial whaling? Oops, sorry. I do it because we're able to use the fact that people hunted whales to estimate their historical biomass. So when people went on these whaling expeditions, they also had to document how many whales of each species they were hunting. They did it for many reasons, financial and insurance ones. So whenever they went back from their excavations, they had to bring in to their insurance company their logbooks, and in their logbooks they logged how many whales they hunted on this excavation. And essentially for the past few tens of years, people have been collecting and gathering this data and trying to correct for cases where people underreported or overreported the numbers of animals that they hunted. So this is for us kind of like a gold mine of data. We have essentially for every year since hunting has started, for every population or species, how many individuals were hunted that year. So it's a very sad story about how we very, very diligently went and hunted these beautiful animals. But for us, it helps us, this type of data. So what do we do with this type of data? We use a relatively simple model that says maybe something along the lines of this. So for every year, the number of individuals is equal to the number of individuals the previous year minus the number of individuals that were hunted, right? Obviously we killed them, so we don't have them anymore. Plus some sort of growth factor, a natural growth factor, right? Because the population is also, there are natural deaths, but also births. So that's essentially what the model does. Does anyone have questions on this before I move forward? Yeah?
Are you sure that you have the data of all whaling that happened? Like a big enough sample of it?
So can you ask this question in like 2 slides? Good. Okay. So this model, it's slightly more complicated than that, but essentially this is what this first equation does. It calculates the population size every year based on the population size the previous year minus the number of individuals that were hunted plus some intrinsic growth rate that we do know from just people observing whales for many years, so they know what their growth rate is. I'm not going to go into this, don't worry. So just as an example, because it's more fun than looking at equations, let's talk about the humpback whale in the southern hemisphere. So I'm sure you've all seen like these cool videos of humpbacks reaching out the water. It's really one of the most charismatic whale species. We love them. This is why we use this as an example. So this here, the x-axis is time, and these gray bars are the number of individuals that were hunted every year according to our data. So annual catch, they correspond to this annual catch axis. And another thing that we do have is the population size from more recent years. So since, let's say, the 1960s, people have realized that, these animals are important, we want to protect them, and they started gathering population size data. So between, let's say, the 80s and the 2000s, people have estimated the number of humpback whale individuals in the southern hemisphere. And then we're able to use these 2 pieces of information along with our data to fit this population trajectory. So this population trajectory essentially does what I did before. For each year, the population size is the same as the previous year, minus the number of individuals that were hunted, plus some sort of growth factor. We can talk all about uncertainty and stuff here, but maybe we won't do it in this forum if anyone's interested. You had a question?
Can you talk about the growth factor? Because in the growth factor, you also have to take into account the number of previous individuals in the past year, no?
So the growth factor is, we do it by fraction. So it's some percent. Let's say there's a 4% growth rate, and then you also take into account the population size of the previous year. And one very strong assumption that we do have here is that before the onset of these whaling expeditions, populations were at carrying capacity. That means they were at their maximum. So marine mammals were having fun, everything was well, and then people went and started hunting them. By the way, for anyone taking pictures, I was asked to put these slides up on Moodle, so I will, and you're welcome to use them.
So in this, is the assumption that the birth rate per population is constant?
Yes.
So would it change the result by much if you change that?
Yeah, so that's one other very strong assumption that we have to use. We have to say, for the sake of the simplicity of the model, we don't consider that the growth factor fluctuates over time. It's a pretty strong assumption, mainly due to the fact that we know that marine mammals are suffering from many things on top of our hunting, things like noise pollution, for example, from our ships at sea. It wouldn't have that big of an impact. I think what would make a very big of an impact is, it connects to your question before, if we're underestimating the amount of hunting that people have done before. So it's possible, right? That you asked.
Yeah, and I have another question.
Okay, so let me just finish this point. So if we're underestimating the size of these gray bars, what will happen in the model? What will happen to this blue line? Can anyone guess? It will go up. It will go up. So it's very, very possible that what we're providing here is a very conservative assumption, both because we're estimating based on the assumption of in 1850 everything was fun and games, and hunting is the only thing that impacts these population sizes, which we know is a very, very conservative towards humanity's behavior assumption. What's your other question?
you said that we assumed that in the past whales were in the carrying capacity. So two things. One, today probably the carrying capacity is much lower than the, I don't know, 1800s because, you know, krill fishing and stuff like that. The other one is when we got to the decline in whales, probably didn't the population like jump back really fast because there was no competition for food and stuff like that. Like the growing factor was with a bias to being too high at that point.
Yeah, so very good questions. I don't really want to go into all of the detail and bore everyone, but essentially, yes, these are great questions. We do also compare our model results to people who took things into account like what happens due to availability of prey changes. So the fact that we, change the availability of krill, it changes the carrying capacity, what happens to the results then? I have to say it doesn't change the result that significantly. It would probably when we reach what would be close to carrying capacity before. But I think when we all think about these population dynamics models, we think about the classic example, which is bacteria. And then we think about a perturbation, and things jump right back up. But whales are animals with a very different set of life history traits. They have a very, very slow life history, which means they reproduce rarely, and it takes a very long time for them to grow to their full size. So essentially what we can do is combine all of our estimates for every population together, and we can see that despite the fact that we put commercial whaling restrictions in the 60s already, and then we put a commercial whaling ban in the 1980s, we're still nowhere near what we think is the carrying capacity in the 1850s. So these things, they take a very, very long time to recover. Just a short explanation about this plot, if you haven't seen this type of plot before. It's a stacked area plot, so things are stacked one on top of the other. They're not hidden behind one another, which for some reason people assume sometimes. So for example, if you look at the very top, we can see that the blue whale biomass in 1850, we estimate it to be roughly 30 megatons. Where is it today? It's this tiny sliver here. So blue whales, they're not extinct, but in terms of their ability to provide ecosystem services and other things as they did before, they're not as present as they were historically. Yes?
Sorry, last thing on this.
No, please.
I'm from the coast in the southern hemisphere, and from my place you can see humpback whales and blue whales migrating, and just some good news. In recent years, their populations have been amazing. Like, we can see so many more than when I was a kid. And dolphins as well. I mean, the dolphins could be a negative thing because there's like more pollution runoff that's really high nutrient that attracts more fish and stuff, and then these spaces. More dolphins, but the whale populations are definitely recovering. You can just like visually see and feel and hear them.
Yeah, so it's a great point. I think you can also see it in the chart, but you will be able to see it better if you zoom in here. So if you zoom in on the past, few decades, we have done very well when humanity has restricted commercial whaling. It not only likely saved these species from extinction, they're now recovering. Their recovery is, however, slower than I think I would expect. I think all of us who thought about like all these population dynamics modeling, the classic example is you leave something alone and then it just pops back up. But obviously, reality is more complicated for things with longer life history traits. But definitely, yes, populations are recovering, which leads me to my next point. Yeah.
So you talk about population. Usually we talk about number of individuals, right? And here we don't take it into account, and the differences in the weight actually means that the differences are even greater than usually here. If we have very little mass of blue whales, which are the largest,
yeah,
and compare it to the number of seals, which are the smallest, and still, the differences are even just the definition of population by biomass. It's a bit.
I see what you mean. Yes, it's a different story. It would be different if I told this story by number of individuals, mainly because the mass hunting was aimed towards great whales, which comprised the majority of the mass. If I looked at the number of individuals, it would be completely different. But again, I think there are reasons to do it in terms of the services they provide to their environment. So it's not just because I like blue whales. It's also because the fact that blue whales have a massive mass enables them to do things like transport nutrients from deep sea to the shallow sea in a very massive amount and other things. So again, would you want to consider things that are not biomass? Yes, definitely. It's important and interesting.
No,
and this is exactly what
the differences between biomass and number of individuals, like
as a whole.
Benefit, what the advantage, what the disadvantage. I think that when we talk about population,
it might be
misleading.
Really
see the advantage in looking at biomass instead of.
So you don't see the advantage of looking at biomass from this perspective.
When we talk about population.
I'm not sure I follow your.
Okay, so we can.
So you're saying we should avoid the use of the word population, maybe, because it's misleading.
Yeah, it depends on what your goal is. But if you want to understand the population distribution, it's usually about individual.
Okay, I think usually we can talk about it further, but it might be misleading for sure. In any case, this is a paper that came out in Nature last year. I said Nature and everyone's looking up. It's an opinion piece that meant to say, like a very important one, that meant to say that this governing body called the International Whaling Commission, it's kind of wasting its time. They're meeting every time and they don't do much. They don't make as many decisions. And they use this graph to make their point. They're like, the International Whaling Commission has done its job. Populations are now recovering. And they go into a lot of the kind of maybe the politics of the organization, which I really don't know much about, and maybe they have a very good point. But what happened following the publication of this opinion piece was that many people picked it up and they said, well, populations are doing awesome. We can go back to hunting them. And that's, in my opinion, a classic case of shifting baselines, because if we look at recent years, yes, biomass has increased, populations have increased. But if you want to consider, going back to hunting things like great whales, you can clearly see that they're nowhere near where they were in the 1850s. So when you tell people that populations are doing well, and people what they derive is that populations are doing fine, now we can go back to hunting them, that's a tricky message. So we have to take into account what is the baseline. So where is the point where we think populations should be? And the fact that they were doing very, very poorly in the 1980s and we're doing better now doesn't mean that everything is fine. That's again using this qualitative thinking, binary, things are bad, things are good, instead of actually looking at the numbers and a longer timeline. Okay. Yes.
Is there a specific definition of what is the baseline or how much can we hunt?
Yeah, so for the marine environment, ecologists have kind of a consensus that using the 1850s is fair, because before the 1850s, people also hunted very extensively in the marine environment, but it was harder technologically for them to disrupt the deep sea. And in the 1850s, humanity came up with this fantastic invention called the exploding harpoon. I leave it to your imagination to guess what it does. And it enabled them to go deep into the sea and be much more efficient in these populations. At this hunting, there's a species like the right whale that were also extensively hunted before that for other reasons. But in terms of biomass, it doesn't change our biomass estimate that much if you go further back in time. And 1850 is a good baseline for that. That's also one of the reasons that we focused on 1850 till now.
Is the baseline? What does it practically mean that 1850 is the baseline? If we want the total biomass to be like 1850?
So now you are asking me to change my scientist hat and put on a policymaker hat. I'm not sure I would be very good at that. I think what I'm saying is, if you want to consider changes over time, you have to consider the furthest back in time you can go, and then you have to decide where you want to be. But the other option is to just like do whatever you want at that time point. So I'm not saying, obviously humanity has advanced a lot. We require a lot of resources for that. These resources, they come at a cost. I'm not here to say, I never use anything that comes here via ship. Like I also order stuff online. I know it disrupts the marine mammal populations. It's there's no zero-sum game, but it's also a tricky question. You had a question?
No, I just wanted to say that at some point you have to make a decision which, it's a choice in the end, which baseline, which type to use, but it's based on the available data in this case, right? We don't have data. We have, like you said, you have the logs, but we don't have any data probably from the 17th or 16th century. You would go maybe, but if you have no data, then you cannot use another baseline out of pragmatic reasons. Right?
No, you can use any baseline between 1850 and today if you wanted to. Right? You can say, I want to go back to 1890. This is the furthest back we were able to do at this point. I hope this is like a stepping stone for first creating better estimates for this timeline, maybe creating projections for the future, and maybe people will be able to go further back in time. Like that's how we progress as a community. But yes, definitely I think my main takeaway here is we have to have some sort of estimate, and then we have to be able to keep improving it in the future. And then that would enable us to make these like more informed decisions. Someone had another question? I'll move on. How are we with time? Wow. Okay, so we talked about marine mammals for a while, but actually I promised the global biomass of mammals since 1850. So this is what happens when we combine all four groups. So domesticated, it's kind of hard to see with the coloring here, but domesticated mammals are at the very top, then humans, then wild land mammals, then wild marine mammals. We go back in time to 1850, and then you can see that the biomass of wild mammals and humans and domesticated mammals was roughly equal in 1850, and the further we go in time, it changes. So we go from roughly 50% to that is comprised from wild land mammals to roughly 5% today, if you remember when you raised your hand before. Yeah, and it just came out last week, so we had a celebratory day. Okay. So I do want to spend 5 minutes talking about how do back of the envelope calculations come into play here. It's all fun and game with models. It's really nice. You have a model, you put something in, you get something out, and you can just report it. But what we try to do as well as we can is try and see whether these estimates make sense in any way. So whether we can say something about each of these estimates and whether they're reasonable. So does anyone have actually we had a few ideas before how to do it with wild land mammals. But I do want to give an example from our work now. So what we do is we provide these sanity checks, so you can call them plausibility tests, on our estimates. And does anyone know what this lovely animal is here? An otter. So does anyone know what an otter is in terms of these four groups we divide mammals into? It's a mammal, if you didn't know. It's a marine mammal, yes. It's a marine mammal. Did you see them before in the graph that I showed you? Not really. Okay, so we consider the biomass of otters and the historical biomass of otters negligible for the purposes of our analysis. And I can just say that and write it in the paper and, whatever, move on. But a better scientific way of doing it is to check whether or not it makes sense that it would be negligible. So just for fun, I don't know how many of you are first years masters and how many of you dug into plenty of supplementaries in the past. I want to show you how much we take our sanity checks seriously. So this is the supplementary of our paper that just came out. Essentially, all of these, like most of these, are just sanity checks that we did for a lot of our estimates and comparing to other people's models. So the sea otter is here, and we have this. This is the marine otter. So we have the sea otter here, just to show you that we're not just like playing games with these back of the envelope calculations. We do it ourselves. It's very important. So what did we do with the sea otter? It's not super complicated, so we can just read the supplementary or you can just listen. Basically, we went back in time and we checked what are the estimates that we can find for the population size. The highest population size that we could ever find was back in the 1700s. That was before they were very, very intensely hunted for their furs. So in the 1700s, we found that there were 300,000 individuals. We can use this as our upper bound estimate. So this is, the most biomass of sea otters that ever was. And then we multiply this with the weight of a sea otter. And then we arrive at a biomass that is 0.01 megaton. So even if we assume that sea otters did very, very well throughout this time and just no one ever knew, despite the fact that this is not the case, still they would comprise 0.01 megaton of the total biomass of marine mammals, where we estimate the current day total biomass of marine mammals to be 40 megatons. So I think it's fair to say that this is negligible. And we do many of these to try and verify our results. So I think it's fair to say it's very useful for us. It's not.
But if you have many species like that, would they not add up to something that's not?
Yeah, so we don't have many species like that. This is a group of 5 species. Obviously, you can't say, out of there are 120 species of marine mammals. You can't say, 95 are negligible without actually going and checking. But if here there are 5 or 10 of these species, and then we take these estimates, we combine them together, and we say, okay, maximum it would be less than 5% of the total biomass, and that's even if you assume that both estimates for the estimates for each of these that the upper bound estimate for each of these species is correct, which is also unlikely. Right? Because we take the upper bound estimate before they were hunted, that's 300,000 individuals, and then assume nothing has changed over this time. This is just to see whether or not it's reasonable to eliminate them. Not to eliminate them, to eliminate them from our estimate.
So did people monitor the amount of otter individuals in the 1700s?
So this estimate comes from a more recent study where people it's fairly depressing. People went places, they're like, oh, I see tens of thousands of otters, now we can hunt them. And then people have been using these estimates to extrapolate and see what was the maximum amount of otters that one was able to find in the 1700s. But yes, it's an awesome question. Yeah, a lot of these questions. I see this and that animal as far as the eye can see. Let's hunt them. That's usually how it ends. Okay. I do want to spend maybe another 10 minutes on our most recent estimate, because we spent a lot. Actually, I gave this talk in the course 2 years ago, and someone raised their hand halfway across the course and halfway through the lecture and said, "Are all your slides mammals?" And I was very offended, so we decided to talk about something else as well. So we're also now working on estimates for another taxa. Any guesses?
Birds.
Good guess. So now we're working on the global biomass of birds. Someone said, oh no, when Ron asked the question last week. Who said, oh no? You said, oh no?
I wanted it to be insects.
Ah, okay, I see. I won't take it personally. There is also a cool paper from our lab about arthropods. If you're interested, it's Rosenberg et al. 2023. So, the global biomass of birds. I prepared many slides. I think we'll just look at a few of them just so that we're not exhausted together. But just for fun, anyone in the room a birder or a bird watcher?
So I waited for penguins for 2 days and they didn't come.
That counts. Anyone else?
I love birds.
Okay, that's helpful. I don't know if you know this, but many people are deeply into bird watching. They're inspired by birds. I think there is the story of Darwin's finches, the Galapagos finches, that helped him wrap his mind around these ideas of speciation and evolution. And also, we decided to fly because of birds, because birds can do it. Why can't we do it? We obviously can't physically do it, but we have to have planes. So it's like a huge public interest, but also in the same way, it's something that is very visible. So if I think about the state, again, going back to this qualitative ideas about the state of nature and how well is nature doing, when I take the bus here in the morning, I see birds, out the window when everything is concrete. They're just very visible because they're flying in the sky. So I think they're even more prone to this illusion of inexhaustible abundance. There are birds everywhere. You go in Tel Aviv and there are pigeons on the ground and they're eating. It feels like they're everywhere. You see them in the sky, you see them on the ground. So we wanted to check whether or not we can come up with a better estimate. And then, since people are so interested in birds, we found that there's so much more data for birds. So people have been collating a lot of data. There's this very cool conservation organization called BirdLife International. They're located in Cambridge in the UK. This is a collaboration with them. They're really awesome people who come up with the red list categories for every species. So they're essentially the people who assign whether you're of least concern, extinct. Have you seen these circles with a endangered next to species? They're the ones that come up with it for birds. They do it using their expert opinion and their data, and we're able to use their data for roughly 1/3 of all bird species to estimate the global biomass of birds. And here I wanted to talk about the method, which is similar to the one we use in mammals as well. But I think we're all exhausted. You will have the slides, and I'm happy to send the paper draft to anyone who's interested. So I'm really happy to discuss, just don't want anyone to fall asleep during class, including myself. Okay, so we use their population estimates to create a global biomass estimate for wild birds. And then, once we have this global biomass estimates, we can do a lot of fun things. So this goes back to these questions of do you compare between species, between groups, all these things. I don't have the latest figure. Okay, we now have icons, but you'll survive without the icons as well. So this is the fraction of biomass of every order of birds. So order is a phylogenetic group. If you don't know what order is, you can just think about a group of similar individuals. So in terms of biomass, for example, 40% of the biomass of wild birds comes from passerine birds or songbirds. So it's both romantic things when you think about songbirds, but also things like crows. They're also songbirds. And then you can consider the same in terms of their fraction of number of species and number of individuals. So can anyone guess if passerine birds are mostly small-bodied or large-bodied? Small-bodied. So in terms of number of individuals, they comprise roughly 80% of the number of individuals, but in terms of their biomass, roughly 40%. And these lines on the top are because of the overlapping uncertainty. So we're not able to report which one is larger, so we kind of just found this graphic way not to report it. And then we can consider other fun things, like where do birds spend the majority of their time?
Oh.
So we think about birds, we mainly think about things that are flying in the air. So this is again in terms of fraction of number of species and fraction of biomass. And this is again we're only discussing wild birds for now. And in terms of where do birds spend the majority of their time, we do it at a species level. So because they have species level behavior. So things like a a pheasant, they would spend their time on the ground because they're chubby and they're not great at flying. So they would be here in this terrestrial group. And this is essentially the vast majority of birds, both in terms of number of species and in terms of number of individuals, don't spend their days in the air. They spend their days resting somewhere or hunting on the ground, and if they have to, they fly.
What about the water? Like, there is birds that
What about
swim.
what? Sorry?
Birds that swim.
Birds that swim, they're here in this aquatic group.
Sorry.
Yes. Yes. Those who are waiting for penguins, think about penguins, yes.
What is generalist?
So generalist is kind of like you can't put one category on them because they divide their time roughly equally between several categories. Yeah?
Why do we categorize pigeons as wild birds, but like rats as part of domesticated animals?
Oh, wow, it's a very hard question. It's a very hard question, and so essentially, one would think there's like a good scientific answer for that, right? I came into this project, I was like, obviously there's like some index to determine how, what people in ecology call human associated you are. So also for other things like lots of wild things are heavily human associated. So it's very, very hard to determine. I would say that in the case of rats and mice, it's also very hard to put a number of them because of their human association, and birds because of their visibility. It's easier to put a number of them. That's one reason that is not the main reason. It's also because of their habitat. So pigeons they thrive in human associated areas, but they do also find themselves elsewhere. And the real reason is you can also move pigeons from one category to another, and it would not really change our estimate. The same with rats and mice. But yes, it's hard. We slammed our head against the wall many, many times with these questions. Even things like, if you consider, the white-tailed deer in North America, it goes in people's backyards. It eats their food. Is it human associated? Yes. Is it wild? It's probably not domesticated, right? It's a difficult question.
Sorry, you say the biomass of pigeons is not that large compared to other birds?
So it wouldn't be that large compared to other birds, yes. And surprising. This is also like a side project with the people of BirdLife who really created like a dedicated estimate for us for this project. You can also think about things like crows and other similar human associated birds. In this case, yes, it would already be rather significant. Okay, so let's not talk about any more of this. We can go back to the oh no question from last time, and I'll ask you to raise your hand again, and we'll see what changed from last time. So what is the biomass ratio of wild to domesticated mammals? So wild to domesticated. Let's do it by show of hands. Is it 10 to 1? Biomass ratio. 1 to 1? Like 10? Last, see? 1 to 10. Everyone became a pessimist during my lecture. My apologies. But the real answer lies somewhere between B and C, closer to C. So you can say
chicken.
You can say chicken. Yes. So
what's the difference between chickens and turkeys?
they're not the same species. So turkeys are like these big-bodied, loud animals, and chickens are So essentially, domesticated bird biomass is comprised mostly from chicken, but also it's interesting how in every continent we also have another bigger bird that we enjoy for our food systems, and then it just can provide some perspective. Before we saw songbirds as like a large fraction of wild mammal biomass, and here you can see that indeed within this polygon here it comprises a relatively large fraction, but it's still let's say nothing compared to the biomass of all domesticated birds. Okay, And then obviously, yeah.
This raises me a question generally about the course and work, but sustainability, no matter how you look at it, is not it's not exactly the most scientific thing. Because here you talk about wild birds. I don't know, in Israel, probably 20% of the wild birds we think about are invasive species that actually do harm to our environment. So when you publish a paper like that, aren't you afraid that, again, like the thing about the whales, people will take it as, a bias to one point of view?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Like whether, so here for the purposes of the analysis, we consider all unowned birds as wild. And we know stuff like miners are not necessarily, what should have been or what the baseline should be back in time. It's a limited perspective. What we're able to provide is a limited perspective. We do our best to state that this is a limited perspective. But what would happen if you remove the miners and pigeons from this wild bird category? It will just shrink compared to the domesticated birds. So I don't think we're misrepresenting the truth here. This is just the best we can do at this time point, given that there is no clear-cut way to distinguish between all these things. We did have an interesting experience trying to see if we can find an index to determine how human-associated things are. But this is a PhD in itself. We couldn't do it in a reasonable amount of time. People have been thinking about this question for a very long time. So yeah, it's definitely, again, as in any other metric, it has a perspective. It's limited, and you have to consider some of the caveats and the uncertainties.
Are there species that appear in both groups? Because ducks and geese, some of them are domesticated.
Yeah,
but a lot of them are...
so these are domesticated ducks and geese, and you do have species that are on the other side. But we do differentiate at here, even at a species level, despite the fact that the duck is a domestic duck. That would be the scientific term. So it's not really at the species level; it's the group level maybe. Okay, and just before we wrap things up, how does this play into account with a historical perspective? People have been, they've been really into chickens over the past 70 years. This is a huge increase in just our consumption of eggs and meat of chickens. Basically, globally in Israel, I'm sure we're leading consumers of chicken per capita. So we're not currently able to provide an estimate for how wild bird biomass has changed over time, but we can say that it's reasonable to think that at some point within this 50-year period, there was some sort of exchange where before, definitely, where it's reasonable to say that in the 1950s, domesticated birds were outweighed by wild birds, and over this time period, things have changed, and now we can see this other type of imbalance. So just to summarize, all of this to say why does this matter for the course and for life and for anything? So I like to think about it as focusing on extinctions alone could leave us with a modern day Noah's Ark. We can just collect species 2 by 2, put them in a zoo somewhere, and imagine that things are going very well for ourselves. Check where no species became extinct. But we need a host of metrics, not just one. We need to think about many other things. Biomass, it's imperfect. It doesn't tell the full story, but it can provide some perspective to help us dispel these misconceptions about the ubiquity of wildlife. So instead of looking out the window or watching a David Attenborough movie, I can actually have some sense of how well things are going in the wild compared to us. Again, not a perfect way to look at things, one way to look at things which is needed together with a host of other metrics. So I think here, we're done. Thank the people in our lab. You're welcome to come and visit us. I'm happy to answer any question you might have about this, about the exercise. But everyone who doesn't have any question is free to go. One thing before we're done, we're still not sure where next week's lecture is going to be because of the limitations that we need a whiteboard, and the only classroom with a whiteboard that we could find that was not hit by a missile is currently unavailable due to renovations. But we'll definitely let you know if there's anyone who's not getting our emails. Let me know, or send an email to the course mailing list, and we'll keep you informed. Sorry about the mayhem. And thank you for your time. And if anyone has questions about the exercise as well, I'm here.